Where's my test? Test. 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 Is it bad? Well, you let me know if it gets to be too much for you, and then we'll do something. Okay. Let me do this if I can. Let me just clip this. Let me just clip this right onto here so we can hear you. All right.
It was been 4 years, according to the Times. How about it?
It was 4 years.
Mm-hmm, according to the Times, because it came out in the Times after she had been in here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. She took all them pictures and everything up the road with my mother and them when I went to school and all that.
Uh-huh.
She went up the road with all that stuff.
Will you let me be able to take a few of those pictures to reproduce for television?
Well, that's up to you. I mean,
great.
Whatever you think, you know.
Terrific.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ms. Simms, basically what I'd like you to do is to tell us your story about your life and about your family. And let me start by asking you about your ancestors, about your grandfather and your grandmother, where they came.
You want me to go back 4 generations? Well, what happened? I did hear my mother, you know. Or maybe I better start before that. My mother was 69 and she was in the hospital. And the doctor said to my mother, he said, "You have an ailment that usually black people don't have." Now, my mother was 69, I almost didn't hear about it. And I said, so my mother said, "Oh my, I guess I got to tell him." And I said, "Tell him what?" My mother said, "I got to tell him my grandfather was Irish, and my grandmother was American Indian." But she was 69 when she told me that. So when the doctor came back in the room, she told the doctor. So then he knew then where this ailment came from that she had.
Why did your grandfather come here, and when did he come here?
My grandfather, my great-grandfather came over on a boat. Came over, a boatload of men came over to work in the West Virginia mines, coal mines. And what happened, after they got paid, one of them said to the others, "Let's go down into Maryland." They was working in the West Virginia mines, and they went down in here into Maryland, and they got tied up with some of these Indian women. Well, my grandfather grew up, and then he married my grandmother. I think they met. My grandmother was working in the house on some job, and I think Grandpap went there to maybe do some outside work or something, you know, like in the garden or the lawn or something like that, and that's how they met.
Your grandmother was an Indian?
No, my grandmother was black.
Oh, your great-grandmother was?
My great-grandmother on my mother's side was American Indian, and she's the one got tied up with the Irishman. That was great-grandmother. But my grandfather, when he grew up, then he married my grandmother. Now, my grandmother's people came from Africa and landed in Annapolis, and then they worked their way up to this part of Maryland. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
They came up to this part of Maryland.
When did they land in Annapolis?
Well, during slavery time, way back, you know, when they was bringing slaves over.
Uh-huh.
And this man, my grandmother's cousin, his name was Elijah Crowner. He was the one that brought the slaves over from Africa, and he was the one that showed them how to get over here. He was like a navigator. His name was Elijah Crowner. And he lived years ago when I was a small kid down behind my church here, where you see that house sitting down the hill. And he also owned some ground further up the road. He's got his grandson lives up there, built a house up there, further up the road.
Tell me about your... Mm-hmm. Tell me about your grandmother. What was she like?
Well, my grandmother, there's a picture of her. She wasn't no pretty woman, my grandmother wasn't, but she was a nice person. So her and Grandpap got married, you know, and my mother was the oldest one. And then came Uncle Malcolm, and then came Aunt Mamie, Mary we call her, and then there was Aunt Laura and Uncle Woolley. One child died in the bunch. And, but anyway...
How did your grandmother make her living?
Housework. Just working out for people, you know, like cooking and laundry work and things like that, you know. So my grandfather, he started to run around a little bit, and my grandmother left him, and she came up here in this house, and she lived here a long while, you know, before they bought it. So my grandfather was, when I was a small child, my grandfather was living down on the boulevard by himself in a house. And so after my uncle was killed, I had an uncle that was killed accidentally. What happened, he was working right back here where Montgomery Woods is for a man named Spencer Heath. And he told Mr. Heath to unplug some wire or another, turn something off, some kind of switch. And Mr. Heath went in the house and forgot it. And when my uncle picked up the wire went in his hand, came up about his feet and killed him. And that's been years ago. I was real little when that happened. I think it might have been maybe in 1921, something like that. And so...
Did you grow up with your grandmother in the house?
Yeah, my grandma. We all was in there together one time. One time when my daddy died in 1917, I was 5 years old. So, because I was born in 1912. I'm 75 now. When my daddy died in 1917, my mother moved back in this house with my grandmother, with her 3 children, with my grandmother, and we all was in this house. My Aunt Mary there, she would stay on the job where she worked, and my Aunt Laura was staying on the job where she worked. And they were, you know, like nurses and maids and things like that in the house, you know. I know you've heard of Belmont since you've been around there in Rockburn. Well, they worked for people like that, you know. And so then my mother stayed there until I was 12. Then my mother moved out with my sister and I and went down the road to live, because my baby sister died when she was 4 years old. She had, what's that heart condition that children have now? Oh, what's it called? It's a heart trouble that children have.
I don't know.
Fever?
Well, something like that. My baby sister had something like that at 4 years old, and the old doctor come in with a horse and buggy and a cane, and he didn't know what to do with her. She died. Old Dr. Williams it was.
Do you remember your grandmother well?
Sure, I remember my grandmother. Very religious, very strict, and everything had to be just so, you know. Mm-hmm. But when she found out that Grandpap was cutting out on her, she left him. So that's an Irishman for you in the ending. Oh my goodness. Mm.
How was she strict? He says she was strict. In what ways?
Oh yes, we had to go to Sunday school every Sunday morning, and you had to say your prayers, you know, every Sunday morning, you know, around the table, dining room table. Your prayers had to be said. Every Sunday morning you had to go to church, and you had to say your grace before you ate, and your prayers before you went to bed, and all that, you know. She was very strict, and you couldn't say no cuss words around her, no bad words, you know, nothing like that. And my uncles weren't allowed to bring no whiskey or beer, nothing in the house. So they'd go out and drink it and come in. You could tell the way they staggered up the steps. They were full of it, you know. But they wasn't allowed to bring nothing in the house, you know. They wasn't allowed to do nothing like that. And my old maid aunt and my grandmother bought this house together, because, see, grandmother and grandpapa were separated. So the house belonged to my grandmother, and the old maid aunt, her name was Laura Mars. Laura V. Mars, that was her name.
Tell me about the house. How was it different when you were a little girl than it is now?
Well, when I was a little girl, there was a coal stove sitting there. And where you see that picture hanging, there was a hole there for the pipe to go into. There was a wood stove out in the next room. That room that I have for kitchen now was a back porch. There was 3 small bedrooms upstairs, where now I got 2 bedrooms and a bath. I got 2 bedrooms now and a bath. One room was real small, you know, where the kids slept in, you know.
Did you have a party?
We had coal oil lamps and coal and wood stove, and in the summer you'd have a little coal oil stove you could cook on. And there wasn't, we had to carry water. We caught rainwater to wash clothes, but you had to bring water from somebody's pump or spring to drink and cook with, you know, like that.
Did you have a room called a parlor?
This was it. This was a room. The table was in the middle of the floor, because that's where the lamp was on. The lamp was on the table in the middle of the floor, you see. Because, see, there was no down. That was the kitchen, out there. And that room that I have for kitchen now was a back porch. And an ice box sat out on it. And you know you didn't have to lock it. You just put your food in the ice box, and the ice man come. And you could go to bed, and nobody bothered anything. And there was, my Uncle Woolley had a chicken yard out back, and pig pen down back, and chicken house, you know, and garden, big garden, you know, everything.
Where did you go to purchase your food and clothing around here?
Well, there were stores down on the boulevard, Old Washington Boulevard.
Do you remember any of them?
Yeah, Mr. George Lehner had a store, and Mr. Hartke had stores.
Now, were they white or were they black?
They were white. They were white, yeah.
Do you remember any black-owned?
Not way back there, no. Not way back there, no. They were They were owned by white people back there.
Would you say that that you and your mother and your grandmother, that you were a very close family?
Yeah, we were close friends because when my daddy died in 1917 and I was 5 years old, my grandmother had a fit. My mother had to come home. So we packed the furniture in an empty house down on the other side of the church. And then the man's roof leaked and ruined my mother's stuff.
What do you think it was that made you a close family?
I don't know. I really don't. When my grandmother left my grandpa, she brought all the children with her. Think of that. When she left him, she brought all the children with her.
Why do you think she did that?
Because he was running around. She thought when you get married, you're supposed to be as one. You know, you're supposed to cut out on your wife. Now you got it?
Sure do.
Yeah, you know, my grandmother was very strict about anything like that. When she found out Grandpapa was cutting out with somebody, you know, running around with some woman or another, she just moved out one day while he was at work. When he come home, he had some kitchen furniture and some kitchen stuff and some bedroom stuff in the house. She left him that.
Who was it who handled the discipline in the house, your grandmother or your mother?
My grandmother was more stricter than my mother. And my grandmother was very strict.
Why do you think it was that she was more strict than your mother?
I don't know, because when we went to church on Sunday, we went with Grandma. Mama stayed home and cooked dinner. My mother would stay home and cook the dinner. And then, back in those days, you had the minister every Sunday for dinner. The minister came home with his wife. The minister come over with his wife and child or whatever he had, you know. You'd feed the minister on Sunday, you know. Now they don't do that. They pay them enough now that they can go to a restaurant and eat. You don't bring no ministers home now. Times changed. Times have changed. I'm telling you.
Do you remember bringing the minister over?
Sure, I remember the minister. One minister we had here was 80 years old. He had been married before and his wife was dead. He was 80 years old and married a woman 26. And I was a little girl. And she had a baby, this woman did. And my grandmother said to my mother, she ought to be ashamed of herself. She knew very well that's not his baby. And it was his baby. The baby come here looking old in the face. It was his baby.
Really?
Yes, indeed. And I've seen that woman and that child since I've been here in this house. And I've been here now in this house about 23 years. She came here one day and wanted to know was I one of them little girls that was here when her husband was a minister, you know. And I said, yes. Can you imagine that? She was looking for Ducker's Lane up the road.
Yeah.
Bauman Drive. She was looking for that, you know.
Tell me, when you were a little girl, who taught you the skills around the house of cooking and cleaning and preparing food?
Well, because you had to do it right. That's why. Let me tell you something.
Who taught you that?
When you went to scrub the kitchen floor, you were supposed to wipe the windowsills and wipe off the chairs and wipe the baseboard when you scrubbed the floor.
Who taught you to do that?
My grandmother. You had to do it right. You had to wipe them chairs off, them kitchen chairs and things had to be wiped off, and windowsills and baseboard and all that. Yeah. Let
me ask you about the church. Which church do you belong to?
The Methodist, one over here.
That's
AME.
Gaines?
AME, Gaines is here. Gaines is AME. That's supposed to be African Methodist Episcopal.
African Methodist, that's right. How important was the church to you in your life?
Well, I tell you now, the church had a coal stove sitting up in it until about 40 years ago. Then they put a furnace in. Then they made the choir things high, you know, it was low, you know, even with the floor, you know, they built that up, you know.
Did you spend a lot of time at church?
Oh, yeah, I still spend a lot of time in church.
When you were a little girl, you did too?
Yeah, I went to Sunday school every Sunday.
Every Sunday?
And went to morning, come home and ate your breakfast and went back to morning church, 11 o'clock church.
A lot of the people that were your friends, did they also belong to your church?
Yeah, a lot of people, the ones that are living. A lot of people my age are dead.
Was the church important to your community?
Yeah, sure.
Do you feel that churches are as important in communities today, as important today as they were then?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Mm-hmm.
What is it about a church that brings people together?
I don't know, really. I mean, it ought to be, you believe in God, for one thing. I'll tell you another thing they used to have around here. They would have, a lot of people would have gardeners and things living on their place, you know. And they would come to church with the kids, you know. But they wasn't paying no rent, you know. If you live in a garden house and the man's paying you for working for him, well, you got free rent. You can get eggs and vegetables and milk and all that. And the only thing you had to go to the store for was flour, sugar, and meat. You know what I mean? You'd be surprised. A lot of that went on around here. You'd live in a big house and have the gardener, you know, as a gardener would be in. The wife would work in the house and the gardener would tend to the outside. The husband would tend to the outside.
Tell me a little bit about the history of Gaines Church.
Well, Gaines's church, Gaines's is getting ready to celebrate. They are 121 years old. And they're getting ready to celebrate. The first church burned down. Its name was Providence. So then they built Gaines's. And my mother was a little girl when they built Gaines's. You know what I mean?
Sure do.
Yeah.
So it used to be called Providence.
It was, and the first church was Providence. And then it burned down, and then they built Gaines's AME Church.
I see.
Mm-hmm. It was named after a Bishop Gaines. A Bishop Gaines. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Sunday school?
Sure, I remember Sunday school.
Tell me about Sunday school.
Well, you go from one grade to the other. They pass you just like in school. You start off, you know, in a little grade when you're 5 and 6 years old. And then you go on to higher grades. Then you got to be like 12, 14, 15. You was in Bible class. You discussed the Bible and talked about it, you know. It's like a grown-up.
And do you remember discussing the Bible?
Yeah, you remember the things that you're talking about, you know. Mm-hmm. It's things in the Bible that you don't hear a minister even talk about.
Why is that?
I don't know. There's things in the Bible that you don't even hear them talk about. I don't know why they skip over that. They never discuss it.
Do you know what kinds of things?
Yeah, like sin to have 2 living wives or 2 living husbands. Because you see, if he brought that up in the pulpit, if somebody walk out of church, maybe he wouldn't come back no more. You know? You heard of that being a sin, haven't you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Because when the day of judgment comes, that first husband is the one who's going to be acknowledged. They're not going to pay any attention to that second husband, you know.
So
2 living husbands. If one dies, that's a different thing.
So the minister thinks if he mentions it in church...
They don't mention that in church.
That people are going to walk out.
They would. They don't mention that in church. 2 living wives, 2 living husbands.
You know something about the history of this whole area of Elk Ridge and Elk Ridge Landing and whatnot. How long have black people lived in this area? Oh,
ever since I can remember. Because, see, my grandmother lived here a long time before she bought it, and my mother was married in this house in 1910. And I was born in 1912. So, you see, they've been around here a long time.
Did they live here even before that?
Yeah, because, see, her cousin, the slave, the man that brought the slaves over, he was down here behind the church, in that little house down behind the church, you see. Elijah Crowner, he was down behind the church. So, you see, he was making some money bringing them slaves over, because he bought up some ground. He bought up some ground up the road. His grandson built a house up there. And then the 95 come through and they had to tear that house down and build another one. Because, see, Granddaddy had bought all this ground up, you see. He gave my grandmother a piece of ground because my grandmother was good to him. They all called her cousin. And I don't know whether he was a first cousin to my grandmother or what that was. But they all called her cousin, Cousin Ella. His children all called my grandmother Cousin Ella. But, so he was making money. And when he went to visit the rich people, like the Bowdens and the Bruces and people like that, they invited him in the living room, even though he was black back there in those days. To see, we didn't get no further in the kitchen, you know.
Why did they invite him in?
Because he was somebody that they was doing business with. Maybe if they wanted a slave or a couple of slaves or something, you know. Now you got it?
When was that?
Way back in slavery time before I was born, way back there, way back. You know, got to go way back for that. Mm-hmm.
Didn't a relative of yours start the Oddfellows Lodge?
The Oddfellows Hall was started, but I can't say who started it. My grandfather was an Oddfellow. He was an Oddfellow, Oscar Hall, and a man named Hal Rollins. Different ones was Oddfellows, but I could not say, or I cannot say who started.
Let me hold off a second. We can change the tape? Okay. We're going to have to change the tape here.
That's all right. So my grandfather had his Oddfellow suit on, you know that.
Miss Simms, I was talking about the Oddfellows.
Oddfellow. I couldn't say who started it. I really couldn't.
What was the Oddfellows? Tell me about that.
It was a lodge, not quite as strict as the Masons, not quite as strict as the Mason, but it was a lodge where the men had meetings, you know. Every one night a week, you know, or something like that. They'd have a meeting, or maybe then they would turn out, you know, march along, you know, with the banners on, you know, and all that stuff. But it was a lodge.
What did they do?
Well, when you died, they stood around the casket and had a little service and all that.
Did they perform any community functions?
Well, they had dances. Now, when I was real little, they used to come into our church back behind the church. Then all of a sudden, the fellows came back from World War I. And there was a white man down on the boulevard named Mr. Smithson. A white man down on the boulevard named Mr. Smithson taught the colored boys how to play in a band. And they started themselves a band in this hall. And then they cut the entrance going to the hall this way. And my sister and I was real little when that happened. And then they started having dancing. But the man that taught them how to play was a white man named Mr. Smithson. And he's got a son living up there behind the Catholic Church now. He's very popular. Everybody likes him up there. Sometimes he goes past there walking his dog, exercising, you know.
Did Mr. Smithson ask the black boys if they wanted to learn how to play? Or?
They must have. Or they asked him to teach them, one or the other.
I see.
They all came back from the war, World War I war, I'm talking about. And they started themselves a band. I mean, they had a brass band down here. Down here in the hall. And they used to have dances. People used to come from all around the place, going to these dances they had, you know.
Now, was that at the Oddfellows Hall?
Oddfellows Hall, downstairs. And in the wintertime, we had school in the hall. In the summer, we had the dances. The benches would be turned back, you know, stacked up or somewhere, you know.
And the band would play at the dances?
The band would play down there at the Oddfellows Hall. They had dances down there. Oh, like 4th of July and times like that. It would be big times around here, you know.
Oh, yeah? Tell me about something like the 4th of July. What went on?
Well, they would have dances, and then when they come out sometime, if they got in a little argument or something, you know, there was one man named Mr. Tom Fields. He could always stop them. They were scared of him. He grabbed them, you know. They know that meant to stop, you know. He was strong, you know. Yeah, they say he really could handle them, you know. Now, the old men, they're all dead now, like Mr. Tom Fields and Mr. Charles Wheeler and all those old men that was having these dances at the Oddfellows Hall. They're all dead now.
Do you remember large celebrations like 4th of July?
Oh, yeah. Everybody had a picnic or something going, you know. Yeah.
Picnic?
Yeah, everybody had something going in the yard, you know. Everybody had a table set night, you know. Yeah. But the Wheeler family and the Thomas family and this family here and the Crowner family, all those old families is the ones that built this second church, you know, the Gaines' AME church. It was the old families, you know.
What were the first businesses in the area that you remember being owned by blacks?
Flower business, like if somebody want to get married or die or something, he fixes flowers. He's in that business. And one time, Molly Gross had a little store down on Race Road. And one time, Pinckney Sims, he had a store down on Church Avenue, where the other school was, where they had the flood and they all had to get out at that time. And but I can't say, you know. Oh yes, and there was Frank Hawkins. He used to go around plastering for people, doing that kind of work. And his son still does that kind of work. Although he's dead, his son that lives in the city still does that. They call him Junior Hawkins, you know, that's his son. And but he was very. And then there was some hairdressers, maybe something like that, you know, people that fix your hair, you know. But I can't say there was too many.
Do you remember patronizing any businesses that were owned by blacks when you were very young?
No, because the stores was up here, and the stores was close to me, you know. What's sense of walking way down there to another store when the stores, there's a drugstore, and there was Sealand's Meat Market, and there was Peter Lick's store, and they were all near where my mother was living. When my mother left here when I was 12, she was living down in Lower Elkridge, and they only had to walk a block and a half to go to the store, you know. Didn't make sense to go way down.
And they were owned by what?
By white, sure.
Sure.
Well, we lived on an avenue. We lived on Railroad Avenue. And we were the only black family on the whole avenue. All the rest was white. And we got along fine with the people. Didn't have no trouble at all. We lived on the avenue with all black. All of it. But it was so funny, you know. The amusing part of the whole thing, I know you're going to laugh when you hear this. I worked up on Lawyers Hill, even though I lived down in Lower Elkridge. But I worked on Lawyers Hill. So you go up there to work, you know, and mind people's kids and everything, you know. And they didn't know there was such a word. So coming down Railroad Avenue, this little cute little white boy would come out, "Hi, nigger lady. Hi, nigger lady." He didn't, but you got up on Lawyers Hill, he didn't hear that. His mother didn't tell him that not to say that, you know. So we just ignored it and kept walking, you know. You see, because we didn't hear that on Lawyers Hill. Different class of people altogether. Didn't hear that word. But down in Lower Elkridge, you know, you would say, "Hi, nigger lady," but we just ignored it. We didn't get mad or nothing. We just ignored it, you know. And they liked us down there. They really did. The white people down there liked us. And Miss Hubbard, when she left Railroad Avenue, that's my frigidaire. Miss Hubbard, when she left Railroad Avenue, she moved to Levering Avenue, and then she moved up Worthington Way. And we still kept in touch. And I even went up there and worked for them. Miss Hubbard, Miss Elizabeth Hubbard and Leo Hubbard. They died very close together. They loved each other dearly. And when he got sick and died, I think she died maybe a month later. Remember we had that bad snow last year? Well, she died like a month later. And her son is up there now in the house. He lives by himself.
So when this little boy would come out and say, "Hello, nigger lady."
Yeah, we just ignored it.
Yeah, well, he didn't really know.
He didn't know. His mother didn't teach him nothing.
Yeah.
Didn't tell him nothing, you know. So we didn't get mad or nothing like that, you know.
Sure. Tell me though, can you remember any specific incidences of segregation years ago?
Oh yeah. I know we couldn't. We had separate schools. All black went to school where I went, and there was white school down on the pike. And when they decided to let the white and blacks go to school together, well, a couple of white ladies, they said, walked up and down the road all day long, thought something was going to happen at school. Didn't nothing happen. They thought maybe, you know, the kids wouldn't get along or something like that, you know. You know what I mean? So anyway, they got along all right. Kids is kids, you know. I played with white children when I was little. My grandmother would take me to work, and my mother would take me to work. And I would play with the people's children while she was doing the work. No, had no trouble. Kids are kids, you know. They don't know. They ain't paying no attention to your color. The children aren't. They're playing with you. You know what I mean? But these children get along all right down there.
Did you feel things changed at all once you became an adult?
Which way are you talking about now?
As far as segregation is concerned and
yeah, that's a bit, because I can go all the way back and remember. See, I can remember, by me being 75, I know when we couldn't ride but the back coach coming out on the train. See, I can go way back that far for you. I remember when Fort Meade was Camp Meade, and you went down there to see a soldier, you sat in a tent. See, I can remember all that. About me being 75, see, I can remember all that, you see. Sure, you come out on the train from Mount Winans to Elkridge to see my grandmother, why, you had to sit in the back coach, and the men would be sitting back there with their working clothes on, the railroad men that was going home from work, you know. You wasn't allowed to sit up. But I had one cousin who was real fair, real light, because she was half Irish and half Indian. She sat up there with the white people just for devilment, and they didn't know she was colored. She used to sit up there just for the fun of it, you know. You know, I think we got more of a kick out of it than we did anything else. You know you wasn't supposed to sit up there, but you sat up there anyway, you know. One of them things, you know. Yeah, I had a cousin. My grandfather had a cousin that was real light, real white looking, and she sat right up there. They didn't know she was colored. Yeah, you know.
And when you get off the train, did you laugh about it?
Yeah, sure we did. That was funny, you know. Wasn't that something? It was more like a big joke, you know.
Sure.
But I know of a case where a man married a woman here in Elkridge, and he came up from North Carolina. And he was a white man, married a white woman. And he told her later that his mother was an Indian and his father was a white man from England. So when his son grew up, he told his son about it. So when his son got married, he said to his wife, I don't want to have any children because they might come here brown, you know. So the wife got pregnant. You know he divorced her? The next woman he married, she's too old to have a baby. The next woman he married. But this little girl looks white. But I don't know what her little girl's going to be. That can will probably come out in the fourth generation. It'll probably come out. Isn't that funny, though?
That is.
He didn't want no children. He told his wife he found out that his grandmother was an Indian. He didn't want no children.
That's peculiar.
And she got pregnant. And I seen the little girl. And she was white looking. She really was. But I don't know what her child will do when she has it.
Tell me, years ago, when you were very young, what did y'all do for recreation? What did y'all do for fun?
Oh, we played dodgeball, and baseball, and all that kind of stuff, you know. And we went to dances, like I told you. You know, went to movies. We did a lot of riding the train, going to movies and back out. Didn't have no television because, see, there wasn't no electric in the house. In neither house. This one or the one my mother moved in. So we'd catch the train and go to Baltimore. Catch the streetcar up the street to the Royal Theater, and you go to the movies, you know. You go to the movies at least once every week. Yeah, and you catch the train, go to town to the market, and shopping all up and down Lexington Street, you know. Oh, we had fun, in a way. We had fun, you know.
When you went into the theaters in Baltimore.
Yeah, we had to go to the theater. We went up on Pennsylvania Avenue. The Royal and the Region, Lincoln, all up on Pennsylvania Avenue. You weren't allowed to go to the Hippodrome in them movies. You weren't allowed to go in those where the white people went. The strictly black movies, they were. Strictly black.
Oh.
The white people had a movie and the black people had a movie. They were strictly black. You might be seeing some of the things they saw, you know. They showed at that theater one time, then they'd come up to the other theater, you know, like that. And we'd see Cab Calloway and all those people in person, you know.
Is that right?
Yeah, on the stage, you know.
But I didn't realize there were separate white theaters and black theaters.
Yeah, oh, sure. Oh, my goodness, sure it was.
Weren't there any theaters where both could...
Not back there, not when I was a kid. There were stores now that you couldn't go in and buy nothing. So one lady down here on Race Road, he met a girl that came up from Upper Marlboro. Now, this man's place they lived on, he had a couple Gardner houses, and he had a big house he lived in. So anyway, this lady comes up here to Elkridge, her and her sisters and everybody come up here to Elkridge, and brothers and everything. And they're always looking like white people, but they were colored. So her son married one of the girls. So you know what she did? Every time she saw a coat or dress or anything in the window she wanted, she sent her daughter-in-law to get it, because she was looking white. And this lady is still living down the road here, this daughter-in-law that married her son. The son's dead. And she's still living. And she came in here next door to the church where I go 3 days a week. And, you know, when they're giving out cheese and butter to the poor people and cornmeal and flour and stuff. And Peggy, the head lady of the nutritional site, didn't know she was colored. So I said, yeah, she's colored. Although a little brown girl brought her in there, she was stuck with somebody that brought her in there, you know. That was her granddaughter. And I said, no, she's colored. And then I told her the story, then like I'm telling you about how her mother-in-law used to get her to go in these stores that she couldn't go into and buy these clothes. I'm telling you, you'd be surprised what went on back there. He was funny. You know, it's a big joke, you know. It's a big joke. That's what it is. But you know what I can't figure is this out. Now think about it. All right, we weren't allowed to go in the stores. We weren't allowed to sit on a train in the same coach. Would you please tell me where these light people came from? Now think about it. That's something to think about, though, ain't it? When you think about this family that came up from Upper Marlboro looking white, and one of them married a lady's son down on Race Road. Something went loose somewhere, didn't it? You know what Dr. Hammond's wife told me? Dr. Hammond's wife told me when I was working for her on Lawyers Hill, and she had a nurse that stayed right in the room with her all the time, because they had plenty of money, you know. So Dr. Hammond's wife told me that her father had slaves. Her father and mother had slaves. And her father didn't want the brothers to get married too young, you know. She said her father told him, go down and fool with the slave girls. Now, she told that. And she said, when the babies came, you ought to seen them. Said they were the prettiest things you ever seen. And the nurse said, don't pay no attention to her. She's talking out of her head. She don't know what she's saying. That's what the nurse said to me. But that woman didn't know what she was saying. She knew what she was saying. Then there was another family come up from the South named Fitzgeralds. And after the white people mixed them up, they educated them. They were school teachers and lawyers and doctors and everything. They really were. Family of people that lived in Elkridge named Fitzgerald.
Do you remember any interracial marriages when you were young?
No. You didn't hear nothing like that. If a woman had a child by a white man, they didn't get married. But let me tell you the sad part about the whole thing was this. There was a white man down on the pike, said his name was Mr. Rolls, and he had a child by a black woman. And the child came in the world real light, you know, lighter than my daughter there, you know. And stayed single as long as he lived. And then a girl asked me not too long ago, if I knew who her father's father was. And I said, no, I don't. She said, well, I know my father's father is white. That's just what she said. But she said, I don't know who it is. So it was a couple of men that used to come down the road here to the Catholic Church, and they never got married either, and I'm wondering if one of them. I'm wondering if it's one of them. Used to go down here to the Catholic Church. It was, one of them was, last name was Hawkins, and the other one was, it was Hawkins and Rosalind. And I'm wondering about that thing, because she asked me, she did. And she came in the world real light, she did. Came in, her mother was dark, but she came in the world real light, because her father, see, was half white, you know. And she wondered who her father, if I knew who her father's father was. I told her, no, I didn't know. I really didn't. She asked me down at Catholic Church one day if I knew.
Do you remember years ago when there were signs on things like buildings that said colored entrance only?
Oh, yeah. I remember, sure I did.
Were there places in Howard County that had that?
Well, yeah, where you couldn't go into. Mm-hmm. You could go, I tell you what you could do. You could walk in a bar and buy something and walk right out with it. But you couldn't sit down in there. If they had a bar around anyway. Like Jack Clifford, you know, across the bridge, you know, going towards Calvert Distillery over that way, you know. You walk in Jackson, buy half a paint or something, bring it out. But you couldn't sit down back in the other room. We didn't think nothing of it, didn't know no better. Nobody wasn't mad at nobody or nothing. And I tell you what, I had a brother-in-law used to play good baseball. Oh, he used to play good baseball. And the white boys loved for him to play ball with them. But, I mean, didn't nothing come of it because, you know, he was black. But they just loved to play ball with him. Walter Cager, they used to like to play ball with him. Because kids would play together as kids, you know, and they grew up together, you know, and they know each other, you know.
How come they played together when they were young, but all of a sudden it changed when they got older?
Yeah, they got older, you know. Yeah, something happened, I don't know. But what got to me was how you couldn't go in the store and how you couldn't go in all these places with them, you know. Couldn't sit on the train beside them, and where these light kids came from. I'm laughing about it because it's funny. You know, it really is funny. I mean, I think about it now. You got to laugh about it because there's nothing else to do. So, but I'm wondering now, do you think it was curiosity?
I don't know.
I mean, why was that black woman approached in the first place?
He must have thought she was attractive.
Well, I mean, what made that happen? I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out. If they weren't supposed to sit together on a train, they wasn't supposed to ride together on a bus, they wasn't supposed to go in the store and buy clothes in the same store, they couldn't go to the same movie, they couldn't. The only place white and colored went together was in the Catholic Church. And then the black people all sat in the back seats on one side. They had the 3 or 4 back seats on one side where the black people sat. That was even in church, the Catholic Church down the road here. Now they're sitting anyway down there. All that's done away with. But there used to be a time when they went to the Catholic Church, they all sit on the last 4 pews back.
Yeah, it's change too.
Mm-hmm.
My foot's asleep. I have something.
Yeah, you getting sleepy?
My foot's asleep.
Oh. You know, it's sort of funny when you think about it. But now,
I think he's close to 90.
ain't the man down on Hanover Road, is he?
He lives in North Laurel.
Oh, no, I
He
wouldn't
lives on
know.
Harmony Lane.
No.
I know him.
No, I don't know him. That old man in town I talked to tonight might know him. He's 84. He might know him.
In where, you know?
Baltimore. Man that used to live in Laurel, now he lives in Baltimore.
Oh, in Baltimore.
He's 84. He might wouldn't know who you're talking about. Yeah, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking with Mr. Levi on Monday.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this old man that I talked to in town, his name is Preston Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the name might ring a bell with him. Preston Johnson.
Oh,
And he has a daughter. He has a daughter that lives in Laurel, and the daughter's husband died not so long ago. And the daughter's husband's name was George France. George France. The daughter's husband's name was George France. And this man's name is Preston Johnson.
Preston Johnson.
He used to live in Laurel. Mm-hmm. And he's got a daughter in Laurel yet. Mm-hmm.
You ever go over to the Florence Bain Center?
Yeah, I've been there, sure. We'll go up there and eat Thanksgiving dinner, I guess.
Oh,
Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, we'll probably go up there and eat Thanksgiving dinner, and we go down Mount Video Road and play bingo once a month. The last Monday in every month, we go down there. You
Mr.
know.
Levi goes over to the Florence Bain Center, I think 3 times a week.
I don't know him.
Yeah, he's over there a lot.
Is he, no, the man that I seen, his last name was Fields, so that couldn't be him. One old man I talked up there, he's an assistant minister or something.
Yeah.
I don't know this man you're talking about.
I think he's over there on, I think he's there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays.
He'd probably be up there for that Thanksgiving dinner.
Probably will.
Uh-huh. He'd probably be up there for that.
Because I know he lives by